were coerced.
It's a controversial triple murder case, the trial of Tony Carruthers and James Montgomery, and it may get even more controversial in the next week or so. Aside from Carruthers representing himself in this trial, now, one of the state's former key witnesses is about to change his story.
The deposition that was given, Audrey, the statements that were made were coerced, and I would say coerced, I would say that I was given a police report to familiarize some of the things that was involved surrounding the case. Some of the things in here is bits and pieces that were put together for the grand jury by the prosecution.
Back in March of 1994, this man, who's asked us not to reveal his name and to photograph him in silhouette, was brought before the grand jury to testify for prosecutors in the case against Carruthers and Montgomery. According to portions of his taped deposition, he told grand jurors about a conversation he had with Carruthers in the Shelby County jail legal room. Quote, Tony told me that he shot Tucker and Marcellus there on the scene immediately. And I said, why did you all burn the truck up, Tony? Carruthers allegedly replied, man, our fingerprints were all over the truck. Well, Tony, why you all killed the woman? Tony said she started hollering and said, James put the pistol up to her head and told her, expletive, or else you're going to die like your dead, expletive son. But when we interviewed this man on February 28th of this year, he told us a different story. This man admits he approached homicide with some information on this case, but then said a prosecutor contacted him.
I was contacted by prosecutor attorney Jerry Harris, and he asked me about the case and asked me would I be a witness for the state, and I told him yes I would, you know what I mean, and then we went on to discuss, you know what I mean, like, you know what I mean, I told him, I asked him, you know what I mean, well, what's in this for me, you know what I mean, he told me that, you know what I mean, well, you know you'll get $2,000, you know what I mean, once you testify.
The prosecution did bring this man before the grand jury, but now claims he's not a credible witness.
He's been arrested one time pawning stolen merchandise from a burglary. I'm not going to put that kind of witness on. Mr. Montgomery, Mr. Carruthers, every other defendant in criminal court has got a right to a fair trial. And a person like this who lies and tells us things, not even about that case, but about other things, they're out.
When we asked this former witness why he's coming forward to recant his testimony after 2 years of silence, this was the response we got.
I was made promises. I was made promises to have all my cases dismissed to be a witness in this case.
So in other words, if you fingered Carruthers and the Montgomerys, your cases were going to be dismissed. Is that what was on the table?
Right. The only thing I had to do was go before the courts and testify.
In a case from 1994 that has haunted me for many, many years, almost along the lines of the Leicester Street murders. It's the case where 2 guys murdered a mother, her son, and his 17-year-old friend. Buried them alive under someone else's grave site. This is the story of Tony Carruthers, James Montgomery, who kidnapped, tortured, and buried all 3 of these people under someone else's grave in Memphis, Tennessee in 1994, alive. These are the facts of the case. Be prepared. True. One more thing. Before I give you these gruesome, very gruesome details of how this was planned or executed, let me say this. Out of those 2 guys, Both of them received the death penalty. James Montgomery, he came back on appeal and made a deal or plea deal for 27 years. He has since been released in 2015. The mastermind, Tony Carruthers, he has just been given an execution date for next year, the beginning of next year. Well, you might as well say this year. After all of those years, Tony Carruthers, the mastermind, is the reason that James Montgomery beat his on appeal, got his death sentence overturned because Tony Carruthers acted a fool in court. He went through 6 lawyers, threatened them, fired them all, until the judge was forced to make him represent himself. So we all know how that didn't turn out well. And so he's to die. He's to be executed. I believe it's March of this year coming up, 2026. All his appeals has been exhausted, and he's gonna meet his fate just as Dolores and Marcello's Anderson did, and Cello's friend. Right. Let's get into these gruesome, horrific details. True. Timeline of the murders. Summer 1993 is when the master plan was formed. While in prison on an unrelated conviction, Carruthers wrote letters to another inmate describing a plan to make the streets pay once he got out, talking about robbing drug dealers with money and jewelry. February 24th, 1994, the disappearance. Anderson, his mother Dolores, and teenager Frederick Tucker left a Memphis duplex neighborhood in a borrowed Jeep Cherokee. None returned. Witnesses later placed Carruthers and the Montgomery brothers in contact with Anderson that evening. February 25th, 1994, burned Jeep and missing persons. The borrowed Jeep was found burnt in Mississippi. Family members filed missing person reports when Dolores and Marcello's failed to come home. March 3rd, 1994, the discoveries of the bodies at the cemetery. Acting on information from Jonathan Montgomery, that would be the brother of James Montgomery, who later hung himself before the trial even began, found hanging from a shoestring at 201 Poplar, Shelby County Jail. Detectives went to Rose Hill Cemetery and exhumed the grave of Dorothy Daniels. That's who they buried the 3 bodies under somebody else's grave. Under her casket in a separate pit dug earlier, and we're going to get into how all of this happened in 1 second, they found the 3 victims' bodies. And of course, the trial. Let's go. All right. The proof introduced at the guilt phase of the trial showed that one of the victims, Marcello's Anderson, Skinny Pimp made a song about Cello, they used to call him back in the days, was heavily involved in the drug trade, along with 2 other men, Andre Baby Brother Johnson and Terrell Adair. Anderson wore expensive jewelry, including a large diamond ring, carried large sums of money on his person, and kept a considerable amount of cash in the attic of the home of his mother, victim, Dolores Anderson. When his body was discovered, Anderson was not wearing any jewelry and did not have any cash on his person. Anderson was acquainted with both defendants, and he considered Carruthers to be a trustworthy friend. The proof showed that Anderson's trust was misplaced. In the summer of 1993, Jimmy Lee Mays Jr., a convicted felon, received 2 letters from Carruthers, who was then in prison on an unrelated conviction. In the letters, Carruthers referred to a master plan that was a winner. Carruthers wrote of his intention to make those streets pay me and announced, everything I do from now on will be well organized and extremely violent. Later, in the fall of 1993, while incarcerated at the penal farm, they call it in Memphis, awaiting his release, Carruthers was assigned to work detail at a local cemetery, the West Tennessee Veterans Cemetery. At one point, as he helped bury a body, Carruthers remarked to fellow inmate Charles Ray Smith, that would be a good way, to bury somebody if you're going to kill them. If you ain't got no body, you don't have a case. Smith also testified that he overheard Carruthers and Montgomery, who also was incarcerated at the penal farm, talking about Marcellos Anderson after Anderson had driven Carruthers back to the reception center from a furlough. According to Smith, when Montgomery asked Carruthers about Anderson, Carruthers told him that both Anderson and baby brother Johnson dealt drugs and had a lot of money. Carruthers said he and Montgomery could rob and get Anderson and Johnson once they were released from prison. When Carruthers was released from the Department of Correction on November 15, 1993, he left the jail with Anderson. Anderson is cello, so they already knew each other before. So Tony Carruthers knew that cello was deep in the dope game. Carruthers accompanied Anderson to Andre Johnson's house and received a gift of $200 cash from Anderson, Johnson, and Terrell Adair, who was present at Johnson's house. 1 month later, on December 15, 1993, Smith was released from the Department of Correction. Upon his release, Smith warned Anderson and Johnson of Carruthers and Montgomery's plans to get them. According to Smith and Johnson, Anderson did not take the warning or the defendant's threat seriously. Big mistake. In mid-December 1993, Mays, his brother, and Carruthers were riding around Memphis together. They came around Terrell Adair's red Jeep on the street in front of Dolores Anderson's home, where a drive-by shooting had just occurred. Adair had been injured in the shooting and was in the hospital. Jonathan Lulu Montgomery, James Montgomery's brother, was at the scene of the shooting, and he joined Carruthers in the back seat of Mays' car. According to Mays, Carruthers remarked to Jonathan that it would be the best time to kidnap Marcellos, and Jonathan asked, which one, baby brother or Marcellos? Carruthers then nudged Montgomery with his elbow and said it was going to take place after James Montgomery was released from prison. About 2 weeks later, on December 31st, Mays saw Carruthers loading 3 antifreeze containers into a car, and Carruthers indicated to Mays that the containers were filled with gasoline. On January 11, 1994, James Montgomery was released from prison. After his release, Montgomery told baby brother Johnson that he, not Johnson, was in charge of the neighborhood. He wanted his turf back. Montgomery said, it was my neighborhood before I left, and now I'm back, and it's my neighborhood again. Montgomery asked Johnson if he wanted to go to war about this neighborhood. When Johnson said no, Montgomery replied, "You feeling now like I'm about to blow your motherfucking brains out. And you all need to get in line around here or we're going to war about this." Near the end of January or the 1st of February 1994, Johnson and Adair saw the defendants sitting together in an older model gray car down the street from Johnson's mother's home. It was late at night, between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. When the defendants approached Johnson and Adair, Montgomery asked why they thought he was trying to harm them. Montgomery told them, "Look, I told you, we ain't got no problem with nobody in this neighborhood. We already got our man staked out. If we wanted some trouble or something, we got you right now. We'd kill your whole family." Confirming Montgomery's statement, Carruthers told them, "We already got our man staked out. You alright? If there's any problem, we'll deal with it later." Montgomery explained that he intended to take the man's money and drugs and said if the police didn't have nobody, they wouldn't have no case. On February 23, 1994, Marcellus Anderson borrowed a white Jeep Cherokee from his cousin Michael Harris. Around 4:30 on the afternoon of February 24, 1994, witnesses saw Marcellus Anderson and Frederick Tucker ride in the Jeep Cherokee along with James and Jonathan Montgomery. About 5 p.m. that day, James and Jonathan Montgomery and Anderson and Tucker arrived in the Jeep Cherokee at the house of Nikita Shaw, the Montgomery brothers' cousin. Nikita Shaw, her 4 children, and Benton West, also her cousin, were present at the house when they arrived. The 4 men entered the house and went downstairs to the basement. A short time later, James Montgomery came back upstairs and asked Nikita Shaw if she could leave for a while so he could take care of some business. Nikita Shaw told West that she thought they were being kidnapped, and then she left the house with West and her children. West agreed to care for Nikita Shaw's children while she attended a meeting. When Nikita Shaw returned home after the meeting, she saw only Carruthers and James Montgomery. Montgomery asked her to go pick up her children and to stay gone a little longer. Nikita Shaw returned home with her children before 10 p.m. The Jeep Cherokee was gone, but James Montgomery and Carruthers were still present at her home. Montgomery told Nikita Shaw to put her children to bed upstairs and remain there until he told her he was leaving. Sometime later, Montgomery called out to Nikita Shaw that he was leaving. She returned downstairs and saw James Montgomery, Carruthers, and the 2 victims, Anderson and Tucker, leave in the Jeep Cherokee. Prior to trial, Nikita Shaw told the police that Anderson and Tucker's hands were tied behind their backs when they left her house. While she admitted making this statement, she testified at trial that the statement was false and that she had not seen Anderson and Tucker's hands tied when they left her home. In the meantime, around 8 p.m. on February 24th, LaVenthia Briggs telephoned her aunt, victim Dolores Anderson. When someone picked up the telephone but said nothing, Briggs hung up. Briggs called a couple of more times but received no answer. Briggs was living with Dolores Anderson at the time and arrived at her aunt's home around 9 p.m. Although Dolores Anderson was not home, her purse, car, and keys were there. Food left in Anderson's bedroom indicated that she had been interrupted while eating. Briggs went to bed, assuming her aunt would return home soon. A co-worker, whom Dolores Anderson had driven home around 7:15, was the last person to have seen her alive. Chris Hines, who had known the defendant since junior high school, testified that around 8:45 p.m. on February 24th, 1994, Jonathan Montgomery beeped him. Jonathan said, "Man, a nigga got them folks." When Hines asked, "What folks?" Jonathan replied, "Selling them," and said something about stealing $200,000. Jonathan then indicated that he could not talk more on the telephone and arranged to meet Hines in person. Jonathan arrived at Hines' home about 9 p.m. and told him, "Man, we got them folks out at the cemetery on Elvis Presley, and we got $200,000. Man, a nigga had to kill them folks." At that point, James Montgomery beeped in and talked with Jonathan. When the telephone call ended, Jonathan asked Hines to drive him to the cemetery. Hines refused, but he allowed Jonathan to borrow his car, which Jonathan promised to return in an hour. When the car was not returned, Hines called James Montgomery's cellular phone at around 11 p.m. James told Hines that he did not know where Jonathan was, that Jonathan did not have a driver's license, and that the car should be returned by 4 a.m. because Jonathan was supposed to drive James to his girlfriend's house. The Jeep Cherokee that Anderson had borrowed was found in Mississippi on February 25th around 2:40 a.m. It had been destroyed by fire. About 3:30 a.m., after he was informed of the vehicle fire by law enforcement officials, Harris telephoned Dolores Anderson's home, and LaVentia Briggs then discovered that neither her aunt, Dolores, nor her cousin, Marcellos, had returned home. Briggs filed a missing person report with the police later that day. The Montgomery brothers and Carruthers did not return Hines' car until approximately 8:30 a.m. on February 25th. The car was very muddy. Hines drove James Montgomery and Carruthers to Montgomery's mother's home and then drove away with Jonathan Montgomery. That morning, Jonathan, whom Hines described as acting paranoid and nervous, repeatedly told Hines that they had to kill some people. About 2 hours later, James Montgomery and Carruthers came to Hines' home looking for Jonathan. Hines advised Carruthers and James Montgomery that he was celebrating his birthday, and he asked James Montgomery to give him a birthday present. James agreed to give Hines $20 after he picked up his paycheck, and James also agreed to have Hines' car washed immediately as a birthday present. Hines, the Montgomery brothers, and Carruthers drove to a car wash, and James Montgomery paid an unidentified elderly man to clean the car. The man cleaned the interior of the car and the trunk of the car. Neither Carruthers nor James Montgomery supervised the cleaning of the car. After Jonathan Montgomery abruptly left the car wash, Carruthers and James Montgomery asked Hines what Jonathan had told him, but Hines did not tell them. Several days after James Montgomery came to Hines' home and offered Hines an AK-47 assault rifle because Montgomery said he had heard that Hines was into it with some people on the street. James Montgomery told Hines the rifle had blood on it. Hines testified that he interpreted this statement to mean that someone had been shot with the weapon. On March 3, 1994, about 1 week after a missing person report was filed on Dolores and Marcellos Anderson, Jonathan Montgomery directed Detective Jack Ruby of the Memphis Police Department to the grave of Dorothy Daniels at the Rose Hill Cemetery on Elvis Presley Boulevard. Jonathan Montgomery is James Montgomery, one of the kidnappers and murderers' young little brother who hung himself later on, just so y'all know. Daniels' grave was located 6 plots away from the grave site of the Montgomery's brother's cousin. Daniels had been buried on February 25, 1994. Pursuant to a court order, Daniels' casket was disinterred, and the authorities discovered the bodies of the 3 victims buried beneath the casket under several inches of dirt and a single piece of plywood. Wow. An employee of the cemetery testified that a pressed wood box or vault had been placed in Daniel's grave during working hours on February 24th, and that it would have taken at least 2 people to remove the box. Daniel's casket had been placed in the grave inside the box on February 25th, and according to Dr. Hugh Edward Berryman, one of the forensic anthropologists who assisted in the removal of the bodies from the crime scene, there was no evidence to suggest that Daniel's casket had been disturbed after she was buried. Thus, it can be inferred that the bodies of the 3 victims were placed in the grave and covered with dirt and a piece of plywood prior to the casket being placed in the grave. Evil motherfuckers. Dr. O.C. Smith, who helped remove the bodies from the grave and who performed autopsies on the victims, testified that when found, the body of Dolores Anderson was lying at the bottom of the grave, and the bodies of the 2 male victims were lying on top of her. So these motherfuckers threw her, the mama, first. The hands of all 3 victims were bound behind their backs. Frederick Tucker's feet were also bound, and his neck showed signs of bruising caused by a ligature. A red sock was found around Dolores Anderson's neck. Marcellus Anderson was not wearing any jewelry. Dr. Smith testified that Dolores Anderson died from asphyxia caused by several factors: the position of her head against her body, dirt in her mouth and nose, and trauma from weight on her body. Frederick Tucker had received a gunshot wound to his chest, which would not have been fatal had he received medical care. He had also suffered injuries from blunt trauma to his abdomen and head, resulting in broken ribs, a fractured skull, and a ruptured liver. Dr. Smith opined that Tucker was shot and placed in the grave, where the force of compression from being buried produced the other injuries, and along with the gunshot wound, caused his death. According to Dr. Smith, Marcellus Anderson had been shot 3 times, a contact wound to his forehead that was not severe, and 2 shots to his neck, one of which was also not serious. However, the gunshot causing the other neck wound had entered Anderson's windpipe and severed his spinal cord, paralyzing him from the neck down. This wound was not instantaneously fatal. Anderson had also suffered blunt trauma to his abdomen from compression forces. Dr. Smith opined that each victim was alive when buried. And that is gruesome. Gruesome. So, like I said, y'all, James Montgomery, out of all 3 of them, Tony Carruthers, the mastermind, is the one that waited on James Montgomery, his partner, to get released 2 weeks later before they put the plan in motion. Tony Carruthers is the one that fired all 6 of his court-appointed lawyers, threatened their lives, until the judge forced him to represent himself. James Montgomery, his lawyer, did not call any witnesses. Both of them was sentenced to death. James Montgomery's little brother, the one that told the police where the bodies was found hanging in his cell shortly before trial, right? Now let's continue. Because I might as well go ahead. All right. A health administrator at the Mark Luttrell, that's the Pentagon, testified that, now that's the feds, that because of an injury to his arm, Carruthers, now we're going back when Tony Carruthers was in jail when he was formulating a plan, and on his work line, he had a job at the cemetery. A health administrator at jail testified that because of the injury to his arm, Carruthers had been given a job change on October 6, 1993, and had not worked at the cemetery after that date. Another official at the reception center testified that Carruthers was not released on furlough after Montgomery arrived at the reception center on November 4, 1994. They offered this proof to impeach Smith's testimony that Montgomery and Carruthers discussed robbing and getting Marcellus Anderson after Anderson drove Carruthers back to the reception center following their furlough. So they're saying they lying about all of that, right? Let's get to something else. Then they just saying that Jonathan Montgomery, one that hung himself, was lying. He wasn't at the scene of the drive-by shooting involving Terrell Adair. And they just saying Mays was lying about all of this stuff, right? So this is Tony Carruthers representing himself. So he calling all the witnesses, right? And let me tell you how it is. There's a career informant that's in a lot of shit that I'm gonna make another video on, that the state, this back when the DA's office was corrupt. Y'all already know about Amy Wiry. They was using informants to win their cases, and just by letting them read the damn police report and then offering them a deal to go to take the stand and lie, basically, right? So, matter of fact, I'm just gonna scroll up and let y'all read all of this. So for the people that like to read, and then we will conclude this video, and that is an update to let y'all know, because I have always been curious over the years what happened, what was the final outcome with these two guys. So one is out here walking free. That is the dark-skinned guy, James Montgomery. The light-skinned dude is Tony Carruthers, the mastermind, and his ass is about to meet his fate in a couple of months. They about to execute the SHIT out of him, and justice will be served to the victims and the family members of the victims. Y'all always have my condolences, and let this be a lesson that if you're deep in the game, your family members might become a victim of your circumstances. True Results signing out, y'all. Like, share, subscribe. Always support. Cash App $ True Results #2. Like I always like to say, stay true, stay blessed, and stay safe. I'm out. True.